There is a growing recognition of the importance of ICT in governance and the strategic role it plays in overall economic development. The Edo State government recognizes this and is partnering with the World Bank to help strengthen the use of ICT in the state. Now, they just concluded Edo Technology Day. I caught up with Jeff Kaplan, Senior Consultant ICT Group at the bank, and I began by asking him about the World Bank's involvement in the drive to improve governance in the state through ICT. Take a look.
Most of the engagement with the World Bank and the Edo government that is about ICT falls under a sort of bigger umbrella of open government. So within open government, which covers a lot of different areas, there are certain themes or particular issues that we're working on where ICT is being enabled as an enabler, or it's being created as a platform to do bigger things about open government. This is a good example in Edo State where ICT is meant to enable much bigger transformative things to happen. In order to do open data, in order to create these new possibilities of innovation, that data has to go from paper to digital. And that digitization effort is an enormous effort. So that was a core part of the initial phase of this work, was just turning paper into digital data.
Okay, now there's obviously a growing recognition of the importance of ICT in national overall economic development. We're seeing so many other states also keen into ICT and making it part of their policy focus. What does this mean for the Nigerian economy going forward if we see this continuing?
I think you can think of the economic impact of this investment in ICT on two different levels. So from the government's perspective, in terms of its public management of money, it should make the sort of revenue collection, the revenue management, as well as the investment decision-making much more informed. It makes it more of a data-driven process, especially on the investment side. So where the government would spend, the government of Nigeria or the government of Edo State, where it would spend its next dollar and the economic potential and impact of that next dollar being spent. Technology, for example, data, open data, would allow those decisions to be made much smarter. You have a lot more information about the impact because you have data in hand to be able to look at what that impact might be. It makes revenue generation more efficient. It creates, for example, revenue authorities can better manage their revenue intake, can better target where they're not generating the kind of revenue that's expected, or there's gaps. It sort of makes that more visible. And so again, this is an example where ICT enables government to do that sort of revenue collection spending a lot smarter, a lot more efficiently. Beyond government, the economic impacts are much bigger. I mean, that's where you talk about the impact of driving innovation. So a lot of the use of ICT, whether it's creating new e-services, whether it's creating platforms like an open data platform, which is not just for government, it's actually for people outside government to leverage, all of that creates the possibility of innovation. Innovation in government services, but as I said earlier, innovation in services that others are going to create, not government, or in new kinds of partnerships around the technology. So it's in a way, the investment in ICT is an investment in capital. It's a new kind of capital investment in a new type of resource that becomes economically useful across the ecosystem, from government to business to civil society, or even just an individual developer sitting in their house.
Okay, now the rate of ICT development in Nigeria, is it fast enough to make one think, okay, the 2020 vision, does it make it more realistic if we look at the pace at which ICT is developing in Nigeria?
I'd actually answer in the kind of reverse. What I would say is, it would be hard to imagine Nigeria or any country reaching those kind of development goals or economic goals for the country without ICT playing a central part. You can't imagine them getting to the level of growth and sustaining it, which implies a lot of innovation, without those ICT, those technology enablers in place. And that's things like broadband, that's things like specific platforms like I spoke about with open data. That's a range of implementations of ICT, but you can't imagine getting to those development goals without that in place.
Now, obviously, the success of this ICT deployment in the country would only, is probably most likely anchored on a good national ICT policy. Now, your thoughts on Nigeria's ICT policy? We have a 5-year broadband plan that's meant to see broadband penetration go like fivefold, from what it is today. But I still got a sense here from this conference that it might not be as realistic as we're being told that it is. But let's just hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's always hard to judge the realism of something. I think it's really important that the government, as it's doing, sets targets. You have to put something down that everybody aims at, because from the technology perspective, that's what enables a lot of these large capital investments to take place. I mean, this is all in the context of hitting a target. And so that's really important. Even if the target, people can argue about whether it's realistic or not, but there has to be a marker put down which then enables these investment decisions in capital investments like ICT to get made. So I think in that sense, it's really important that what has been done is done. In terms of are they realistic to hit, it's hard to project that out. But what you do know is that this basic infrastructure of technology does need to be in place. More people need to have broadband access. More people need to be, not just have access to the internet, but actually need to be using it and be digitally literate. And so these are sort of part of the infrastructure, not just of ICT, but of people, the sort of skill infrastructure that's connected to that. And you have to think of those together. I mean, you have a hard infrastructure of ICT and systems and network connectivity, but you also have the soft infrastructure of the skill level, digital literacy. Within the government, there's sort of institutional capacity to manage these things. Those go together, and I think the government's thinking of it that way. I know in Edo State, that's how Edo State is approaching this. There's an investment in the infrastructure, but at the same time, there's a large investment in the capacities and the management that would also be necessary to have these sort of large-scale initiatives be implemented and then actually be translated into things that people care about, like services.
Okay, as a major partner to the state government and even to the Nigerian government as a whole, are you optimistic that we will get it right, going forward?
I'm really optimistic, but I have to say I'm always optimistic, and I say that because every government has its own unique mixture of challenges, right? So that's normal. It's here in Nigeria, it's true, and Edo State has its own particular mix of advantages and challenges, but I'm optimistic. I mean, if you think of where we've come here in Edo State, where Edo State has come in the last 2 years since the partnership with the bank about open governments began. I mean, now you've sort of got the operating system in place, that's what I like to call it, for what would happen next. You've got a team of people that are being trained and are starting to really take charge of this investment and what it will do. You've got infrastructure starting to be put in place. Again, for example, an open data platform has been built already. That didn't exist 2 years ago. You've got teams of people doing some of the challenging things like digitization that need to get done. So I see a lot of progress.